Constitution in our country is more important than any one person. I voted to convict President Trump because he is guilty.
Cassidy voted early.
Welcome back. President Trump's grip on the Republican Party will be tested in the coming weeks with a handful of primary races in deep red states, including in Louisiana, where the president has endorsed Congresswoman Julia Letlow in her challenge of incumbent two-term Senator Bill Cassidy. Senator Cassidy was one of 7 Republicans who voted to convict President Trump of incitement of insurrection during his second impeachment trial in 2021. Speaking at a town hall in Louisiana last week, Senator Cassidy told NBC News he believes he can still win despite the president backing his opponent. Joining me now here on set is Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona, who spoke with Senator Bill Cassidy at that town hall event. Mel, great to see you in person. So I want to ask you, why is Senator Cassidy feeling like he can survive a primary without the president's endorsement, and what makes him confident he could win?
Yeah, it's a great question. This primary is going to be a test of just how powerful Trump's endorsement still is in the Republican Party. But Cassidy, he's not leaving anything to chance, both in his stump speech and his wide-ranging interview with me. He hugged the president very closely. He said, "I have voted with the president 90% of the time. We work well together." And he also, interestingly, downplayed that impeachment vote, basically chalking it up to a disagreement with someone, kind of like you have with a spouse, is what he said. Let's watch a little bit more of our interview. In the impeachment vote today, someone asked you about that. You addressed it head on. You defended that vote. Do you think it's a liability for you in the primary?
Well, it might be, but I tell people, hey, you married? Did ever your spouse do something that you didn't really like and you work through it? Are you focused on the past? Are you focused on the now and the future? I'm focused on the now and the future. If you want somebody delivering for our state to make Louisiana a place where people move to, set down roots, raise their children and grandchildren, I'm your guy. If that's what's important to you, vote Bill Cassidy.
You know, something else that was talked about today was mail-in ballots. Someone was asking, should I be concerned about this? The president is talking about this as a concern. He just signed an order restricting mail-in ballot. Would you still encourage people to utilize that practice? And is it helpful for Trump to be targeting it if you do think it's still something that should be used?
A couple things. The state of Montana, I'm told 80% of their ballots are by mail. So there is a kind of a good Republican state, very red state. And 80% of their ballots are by mail. As a doctor, I know there are people who cannot physically go to a voting booth, and you want to make sure they can still vote. But I'll proudly say of my state that people do not speak of corruption in my state's elections now. We've put in reforms, even though, or maybe because, included in, we have mail-in ballots. There are ways to do this to avoid the corruption. I am a co-sponsor of the Save America Act. And I do think that you can do that. And for those who cannot go to the voting booth or choose not to. For example, the president mailed in his ballot for the recent election. He's leading the free world. It was hard for him to get down there on that day. I still think it's possible to have both.
You've been out campaigning. Gas prices are up right now because of the war in Iran. How much are you finding that voters are concerned about economic concerns and gas prices?
Voters are very concerned about economic issues. We've got to speak to affordability. Probably the price of gas will continue to be influenced by the war in Iran. I would like to think that we can increase production here in the United States, could mitigate somewhat. There may be strategies to do so. When I speak about health care, you weren't sitting where you weren't seeing the view I did, but when I started speaking about health care affordability, heads nodded. And when I spoke about trying to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, heads were nodding yes, in agreement that that's what we need to do. And when I spoke about how President Trump, his team had come to my office several weeks ago to collaborate, asking me to help write a bill to further control those costs. Again, I think that's well received because we've got to control these health care costs. I'll be making an announcement soon regarding this. I do think there needs to be a Republican plan based around the principles that President Trump has raised, and so I'll be putting something out there soon.
And speaking of health care, Cassidy is also facing headwinds from the Make America Healthy Again movement over his support for vaccines and also over his occasional but very careful criticism of Secretary Kennedy, who he did ultimately vote to confirm. But some of those tensions could be on full display later this month when Kennedy is actually going to come appear before Cassidy's very committee.
Fascinating conversation, Mel. So we can say pretty safely, right, that a Republican will win there down in Louisiana. But we are getting reporting that the top Senate GOP super PAC has laid out its midterm plan to keep the Senate, and they are going to be spending pretty big in red states in particular, right? What can you tell us about that plan?
Yeah, this is a massive investment, over $300 million overall that they're planning to spend this fall in their effort to keep the Senate. But what's really interesting, to your point, is where they are spending, including in several red states, $79 million in Ohio, $71 million in North Carolina, $42 in Maine, even $29 million in Iowa, and $15 million in Alaska. So that, to me, Monica, says Republicans recognize this is going to be a tough environment for Republicans in the fall. And Democrats are certainly reading that way as well. The Senate Majority Fund, which is the Senate Democratic counterpart, put out a statement saying Republicans are nervous and their battleground map has expanded substantially into deep red states. So it's not certain that Republicans are going to be able to keep the Senate this fall, but they're certainly going to invest a lot of money in trying to do so.
It's going to be so interesting to watch that dynamic and what the Trump endorsement really can mean or won't. Mel Zanona, thank you for bringing us that.
So right here, when you listen to the clip, a news anchor in Louisiana just told you everything you need to know in about 10 seconds. Bill Cassidy, as you guys seen in the first clip of this video, he voted to convict President Trump on the Russia hoax and the January 6th situation. We know where things stand when it comes to Trump convictions as they were wiped clear, from my understanding. But Bill Cassidy, sitting U.S. Senator, 2 terms in office, medical doctor, considered one of the more experienced Republicans in the Senate, RINO, on the ballot for the first time since 2021. The first time since he made a vote that his own state never forgot. So pause right there. Before we get to the scoreboard, before we get to the watch party, before we get to the $22 million, I want you to understand exactly what we're looking at here. Because this isn't just a story about one senator losing a primary. This is a case study and what happens when the gap between what a leader thinks they're worth and what the people actually decide they're worth gets so wide that no amount of money can close it. Stay with me. Let's start from the beginning, plain and simple. Bill Cassidy is a 2-term Republican senator from Louisiana. Before that, he was a gastroenterologist, a medical doctor. He's not a career politician who came up through party ranks. He came from healthcare. He won his Senate seat in 2014, won re-election in 2020 with 65% of the vote. By any normal measure, that's a senator with a solid base. Now, here's where the story turns. January 2021, the United States Senate held an impeachment trial for Donald Trump following events of January 6th that I mentioned. A total of 7 Republican senators voted to convict. Bill Cassidy was one of them, and he didn't just vote, he actually changed his vote. He voted, quote unquote, not guilty on a procedural question at the start of the trial and then flipped and voted guilty on the final conviction count. He went on record saying, and these are his words that you guys heard, the Constitution in our country is more important than any one person. I voted to convict President Trump because he is guilty. Now, you can agree with that statement or disagree with it. That's not what this video is about. However, what matters for this conversation is context. Louisiana is a deep red state. Trump won Louisiana by nearly 20 percentage points in 2020. These are not voters who were on the fence about Trump. They had a clear, documented, consistent position, and their senator voted the opposite direction on the biggest political moment of that entire era. The Louisiana Republican Party censored Cassidy within 48 hours of that vote. A censor isn't just a strongly worded letter. It's his own party, the people who organized for him, knocked on doors for him, put up yard signs for him, officially putting him on record as someone who stepped out of line with their values. That's a former documented break. Now, here's the life lesson that applies way beyond politics. There's a real difference between having your own opinion and burning the trust of the people who gave you the job. Those are 2 separate things. You can disagree with your team. You can push back on the decision. But when you make a major call that directly contradicts what the people counting on you clearly wanted, and you do it publicly on the record, on the biggest stage possible, that's not just a disagreement, that's a fracture. And fractures don't just go away because time passes. They either get repaired through real, consistent action over time, or they don't get repaired at all. And Cassidy's position was that his legislative record, infrastructure bills, healthcare work, what he done for the state should outweigh that one vote in the minds of Louisiana Republicans. The voters had 4 years to decide if they agree with that, and what we're about to look at is their answer.
primary for U.S. Senate.
U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy is pursuing a third term in office under a new closed primary system. This is the first time Cassidy has been on the ballot since he voted to impeach President Donald Trump in 2021. Cassidy is up against three challengers, including Congresswoman Julia Letlow and State Treasurer John Fleming.
Letlow has touted the endorsement of President Trump, while Fleming points to his past allegiances to the president. Cassidy has worked to push what he's done for the state in his time as senator and distance himself from his impeachment vote.
Let's take a look at the results that we have in. Again, polls just closed at 8.
Now, family, that was the cold open there, because the impeachment reminder for what Bill Cassidy did to President Trump. Now, we're going to skim through this, and I'm going to show you guys the segments in regards to pulling up the receipts so you can think for yourself. But as we look at the answer and what the voters decide in this whole election.
In votes, 44% of the vote going her way. John Fleming, 30%. Bill Cassidy, incumbent senator, currently sits in third place with just 23% of the vote.
And Brianna Moore is covering the Bill Cassidy campaign for us tonight. She joins us live from the watch party in Baton Rouge.
And Brianna, we know it is early, but share the mood of the room that you are in. What are you feeling?
Yeah, you can definitely feel, the music is playing, people are eating, having a great time, but ultimately, Bill Cassidy is still trying to see where this leads. Now, you can see people are sitting here super excited, looking forward to what could come. Cassidy, as well as his staff, tells me they're very confident, regardless of what happened in 2021. But let me kind of set that scene, because there is a hurdle.
It's the first scoreboard, Cassidy in third.
That he will have to cross because of the decision that he made in 2021, and that was to impeach President Donald Trump, as you all mentioned. But they tell me that he is still very confident that he will come off on top, and the work that he has done here in Louisiana will speak for him, especially when it comes to infrastructure, education, and healthcare, especially as a former doctor. But yeah, everybody's pretty hopeful still and looking for him to win his third term.
And there you have that, family. And now I want you guys to check out the 222 million bomb, family, because I find that fascinating for an individual, that did what he did.
Impact spending in this race for a primary has topped $30 million. Bill Cassidy spending nearly $22 million of that. Everybody else running a very lean and mean campaign. Not Cassidy, and it's not working out for him thus far tonight.
Yeah, he certainly did need to spend that much money,
yes,
too. Yeah,
yep.
Tough uphill battle for him. Well,
yes, it is. And now, according to the poly markets, he is under 2%, which is not surprising because the American people don't forget. You know, at the end of the day, what they say, you forgive, but you do not forget. Check this out, family.
Poly markets back just over 11 days ago. Fleming was the leader in this race in the poly market betting on May the 5th. He had 51% of the money flowing his way. Since then, Julia Letlow has gone up to 81% on the poly market site. Again, the betting markets with politics don't indicate winners or losers, but they do indicate trends, especially with what you're seeing here tonight. And on the flip side of that is Bill Cassidy. On the poly market today, he was trading at under 2%. Shocking numbers for an incumbent U.S. senator.
it certainly is. Only 1% of the vote in right now, but I mean, that is telling, right?
That's right.
It's an interesting predictor.
Yep.
There you have it, family. I'm pulling the receipts in real time. And this is Trump calling it out called his shot before she even entered. And I find that very interesting in a matter of that, because when I seen that, I was just shocked myself. And I figured I had to bring this to you guys' attention without a doubt.
Letlow in mid-January before she even decided to enter the race. She wasn't even in the race. He said, this is who I would like to see win. And here we are tonight on the precipice of her advancing to the runoff election. Well, worrying signs for the economy are weighing on voters with record high gas prices and inflation at.
And Letlow said it herself, just to backtrack, just to make sure we got an understanding, family, in regards of it, of being Trump endorsed.
In this race, we have been all over the state crisscrossing.
The race has turned increasingly negative in its final weeks, with candidates trading attacks over alleged lobbying ties and policy positions.
So there you have it. And then also the watch party round 2, family, I wanted you guys to see as well. And then we're going to have a conversation.
High right here all night long. They were just on the floor
The staff were dancing while Bill Cassidy is losing.
dancing, enjoying themselves. There's been a lot of smiles, and I'm actually here with Zoe, who's a part of Cassidy's staff. How are you doing, Zoe?
I'm doing so great. We're feeling really good.
Yeah, I was about to say the energy has definitely been high. How have you guys been able to keep that bubbly spark going into this election?
Well, all I can say is we are in a room full of supporters and friends, and so that really matters. And these people want to be here, and they want to support Senator Cassidy because they know that he is the best option for Louisiana.
Now, let's kind of talk. What made this campaign a little bit different with you being a part of, the staff and various things like that?
Well, for me, I've worked for the senator for a very long time, and let me just tell you, I have seen him wake up every single day fighting for Louisiana, fighting for our constituents. He does not go a day without thinking about how I can make Louisiana a better place to live. And I think that leadership starts from the top. So that's all I can say is just he has set the tone for how all of his supporters can feel and all of his staff can feel.
Yeah, and like you said, as the results are still kind of rolling in, it seems like the energy has not dropped. All the staff that I have seen has been nothing but smiles. Like I said, how do y'all keep that energy alive?
Yeah, again, it starts from the top. We get our energy from our boss.
Yeah.
And he treats us so well. He treats Louisiana so well. He is so good for Louisiana. And so we just pick up on that. We just pick up on that energy and we just go with it.
And that's why you were out there dancing, enjoying yourself. Okay, thank you so much for your time, Zoe. Guys, as always, we will continue to keep you updated on air and online. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and send it back over to you all at the desk.
Thank you, Brianna. On the Democratic side, 3 candidates are hoping to become the Democratic nominee.
All right, family, and now here's the final finale that I wanted to show you guys. 57% and 25%. Anchors call it surprising, but it has been confirmed. And, like I said, the American people do not forget.
Right now, Julia Letlow is the leader, 45% of the vote going her way, 57% of precincts reporting. Surprising number tonight is Bill Cassidy garnering just 25% of the vote and a little over 60, or close to 68,000 votes coming his way.
Michelle Masson tells us more about the 4 candidates competing for the seat.
Incumbent Senator Bill Cassidy is facing a serious challenge from within his own party.
There you guys have it, right? 57 and 25%. So that was the primary last night, May 16, 2026. Louisiana Republicans go to the polls, and the first numbers come in almost immediately after polls close at 8 p.m. And here's what the scoreboard looks like with 1% of presence reporting. Julia Letlow, 44% of the vote. John Fleming, 30% of the vote. Bill Cassidy, incumbent United States Senator, sitting in third place with 23% of the vote. And the anchors on local Louisiana television are already looking at each other like, yeah, this is not good for him, as you guys seen. Now, you might think, okay, that's early, just absentee ballots, things shift, give it time. Expect they didn't shift at 17% of precedents reporting. Cassidy was still third at 25% of the reporting, still third at 57% reporting, still third with 25% of the vote. And the numbers came in and they told the same story every single time. And the only thing that changed as the night went on was that the gap between him and the other two got clearer. But here's where this story stops being just a political story and starts being something worth actually studying. Because according to ad tracking firm Ad Impact, and this was reported live on election night by the local news anchors, total spending in this primary race topped $30 million. Bill Cassidy personally spent nearly $22 million of that. The other candidates, they ran what the anchors literally called lean and mean campaigns. John Fleming and Julia Letlow combined spent less than half of what Cassidy put in. So let's just sit with that for a second. $22 million in a Republican primary in Louisiana. That's not a normal number for this type of race. To put in plain terms, $22 million is the kind of money you see in general election Senate battles in states like Pennsylvania or Georgia, where both parties are fighting for every single vote. This is a Republican primary in a state that hasn't elected a Democratic U.S. senator since 2008. The Republican nominee is basically guaranteed to win in November. So, and this primary was the only real contest. And Cassidy still needed $22 million just to try to stay competitive within his own party. What does 22 million actually buy in a campaign? Television ads. You've probably seen them in Louisiana running constantly, direct mail pieces, flooding people's mailboxes, digital ads, staff and organizers spread across the state polling, opposition research, and a full ground game built to knock on doors, make phone calls, and turn out voters. All of it pointed to at one single goal: convincing Louisiana Republicans that what happened in 2021 was either not that serious or was outweighed by everything else Cassidy has done. And the voters gave him their answer: third place. And here's something that made this outcome less of a surprise to people who were paying attention. Before a single vote was officially counted on election night, the prediction market, party market, had Cassidy trading at under 2%. These aren't polls, as you guys heard. There are prediction markets that are platforms where people put real money on outcomes they believe will happen. Some sitting at home with actual dollars on the line had already decided before polls even closed that Cassidy's odds of even making the runoff were basically zero. And the anchors on election night said that, one said shocking numbers for an incumbent U.S. senator. The other said it is just telling. And that's the part worth understanding here, because the money didn't fail because the ads were bad or the ground game was weak. It failed because money can reach people's eyes and ears, but it can't reach something that was already made up. The voters of Louisiana weren't waiting for more information about Bill Cassidy. They had 4 years of information. The 22 million was trying to solve a problem that wasn't actually a money problem. Now, and this is the part of the story that I genuinely can't stop thinking about, because it was just reported on and it was captured on camera in real time. The news crew that was embedded inside Cassidy's watch party in Baton Rouge all night long, right? So while those numbers were printing on every television screen in Louisiana, the reporter, Brianna Moore, was standing inside the room, as you guys saw, where Cassidy teams had gathered together, watching everything unfold, still partying on the dance floor while they were beginning to lose, even on round one. And what she described multiple times throughout the night was a party. Not a tense room full of people refreshing their phones, not a quiet gathering of people trying to process different results, a party. Music playing, people eating, smiles everywhere, and at multiple points throughout the night, staff and supporters telling the camera on the record that they felt great. Round one of her report, polls had just closed 1% of 1% of it was in. And Cassidy was already sitting in third place. Her description of the room, you can definitely feel it. The music is playing, people are eating, having a great time. His team says she was very confident regardless of what happened in 2021. Round two, now they had 25% reporting. Cassidy's still in third. He has 24% of the vote, and the gap between him and the top two is not closing. Brianna Moore goes and finds a member of his staff, a woman named Zoe. You guys seen that, saying she felt really good. So at the same moment, the scoreboard on the screen showed him in the third place with roughly a quarter of the vote, and then there was dancing. By the time Brianna's third report came in, she literally opened. As you can see, the energy has been high here all night long. They were just on the floor dancing, enjoying themselves. And I want to be careful about how I frame this, because this isn't about making fun of anyone in that room. These were real people who believed in someone they worked for. That's not something to mock, but it's something to learn from, because what you're watching there is a very real and very well documented human pattern. It's called motivated reasoning. It happens when your personal investment in the outcome gets so strong that incoming information stops registering the way it normally would. The brain starts filtering. It accepts the things that confirm what it wants to believe, and it finds ways to minimize or explain away the things that they don't, right? That's what psychologists call it, motivated reasoning. You've seen this in real life in either other settings. A business owner who keeps running the same promotion that stopped working 2 years ago because it used to work, so they keep believing it will turn around. A coach who refuses to adjust the game plan at halftime because the first half was supposed to go differently. A manager who keeps defending a decision to upper leadership long after the evidence has shown the decision was wrong, because admitting it means accepting the original call was a mistake. The watch party wasn't a failure of character. It was a window into what institutional disconnect actually looks like from the inside. The people in that room weren't lying. They genuinely believed, but the voters of Louisiana weren't inside that room. They were at the polling places across the state casting votes that had been decided long before election night based on something that no amount of dancing or confidence or positive energy could change. The scoreboard was the only receipt that mattered, and it was updated in real time while the music played. So let's talk about the other side of this story, because there's a candidate who won, and the way she got into this race is just as telling as the way Cassidy left it. Julia Letlow is a congresswoman from Louisiana's 5th district. She entered this Senate race in early 2026, but here's the detail that matters. Donald Trump endorsed her in mid-January before she had even officially announced she was running. Think about that for a second. The individuals kept saying MAGA is dying, Trump influence doesn't matter, it doesn't work. You know, people are not rocking with Donald Trump. He doesn't have the Republican hold on the Republican Party anymore. All of the things that seem as assumptions. And she was endorsed by Trump. So he didn't survey the field, watched a few candidates compete, and then pick the strongest one. Donald Trump pointed at one person and said, essentially, this is who I want. And then a race formed around that decision, and Letlow herself described it that way. She said Trump approached her about running, and she decided to go for it. Her entire campaign was built around that starting point. When she spoke publicly, she didn't lead with a long policy resume or a list of committee assignments. She said, I'm so proud to be the only Trump-endorsed candidate in this race. That was her clearest message. She repeated it consistently.
On immigration, education, and law enforcement.
I would encourage everybody to come out and vote. I'm so proud to be the only Trump-endorsed candidate in this race. We have been all over the state.
And there you have it. That was her clearest message, and she repeated it consistently. And she wasn't just running on her record. She was running on alignment, on the idea that she and the voters of Louisiana were pointing in the same direction. Now, you might look at that and say, well, that's just political strategy. Candidates attach themselves to public figures all the time, and that's true. But what makes this particular situation worth paying attention to is the pattern it fits into, because this wasn't a one-time thing. Going into this primary, 8 of 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump in January 2021 were no longer in office. 8 out of 10. Some retired before facing the primary, others ran and lost. RINOs. A few are still serving, but the trend line is not subtle. When you see a number like that, it stops being a coincidence and starts being a signal about where the actual decision-making power inside the Republican Party currently sits. Not with party leadership in Washington, not with the Senate caucus, not with big donors. It sits with the primary voter. And Cassidy, with his result on primary night, becomes the clearest recent example of that. He's now the first elected sitting senator to lose a primary in 14 years. The last one was Richard Lugar of Indiana back in 2012. Also a long-tenured Republican. Also seen by his own voters as someone who had drifted away from what they sent him to Washington to do. Different era, different issue, same outcome. When a senator stops reflecting the people who elected them, the people eventually find someone who will. Here's the unbiased way to look at all of this, and I want to be clear about this because it matters. You don't have to agree with the voters of Louisiana to understand what they did. You don't have to think the impeachment vote was wrong to recognize that those voters had a clear, documented, consistent position, and that their senator voted the opposite way on the single biggest political question at that moment. The voters weren't confused about where Cassidy stood. He told them exactly where he stood out loud on the record, and they told him exactly where they stood 4 years later in the primary booth, with 75% of Republican voters choosing someone else. That's not chaos. That's accountability working exactly the way it's supposed to work in a representative system. Whether the outcome aligns with your personal politics or not, the mechanism functioned. The voters set the job description, the incumbent didn't match it, and they replaced them, and that's the whole system working in plain sight. Documented on live television with no ambiguity about what happened or why. So if you zoom out, because this story is bigger than Louisiana, bigger than one senator, and bigger than one primary night, there's a gap that shows up in politics and business and leadership at every level, and it's always the same gap. It's the distance between what someone believes they earned and what the people they serve decide what they are actually worth. Cassidy spent 4 years believing his legislative record would carry enough weight to close that gap. Infrastructure funding, healthcare work, constituent services, real things, documented things, things that genuinely benefited Louisiana. And he wasn't wrong that those things had happened. Those things happened. He was wrong about whether they were enough to override a broken trust. That's a distinction worth sitting with because it comes up everywhere. A company can have a good product and still lose customers because the relationship broke. A coach can have a winning record and still lose a locker room because the players stopped believing he was actually listening. A manager can have years of solid performance reviews and still get passed over because somewhere along the way, the people above them stop seeing themselves in his decisions. The performance is real, the work is real, but when the foundational trust fractures, the work stops speaking for itself and it becomes a list of things that didn't matter enough. And that's why 22 million was, that's what 22 million was trying to solve. Not a lack of information. Louisiana voters knew exactly who Cassidy was and what he'd done. The money was trying to solve a trust problem, and trust doesn't respond to ad spin. It responds to time and to consistent action that actually matches what the people around you need to see. Now, here's the part that directly applies to you as a voter, and this is the piece I don't want to skip past. Primary elections in this country are historically low turnout events. Most people show up for the general election in November because that's when the big national names are out on the ballot. And that's when the TV coverage ramps up, and that's when it feels like the real election. But in a deep red state like Louisiana, the Republican primary is often the most decisive vote that gets cast. Whoever wins the primary almost certainly wins the seat. So the real decision, who actually represents you in Washington, often gets made in a quieter room by a smaller number of people with far less noise and attention surrounding it. Louisiana voters showed up to that quieter room and they changed the outcome. That's part of this story that gets overlooked in the headline version. The tool works when you use it. That's why I always say that your local legislation, your local legislators, and your local elections matter more than the general election first. That's all this was. Voters had a clear position, paid attention to when the decision was actually being made, and showed up for it. No drama, no protest, no elaborate strategy. They voted in a primary. The accountability mechanism ran exactly the way it was designed to run. For any leader reading this, the lesson isn't never make a decision your people disagree with. Leaders make hard calls. That's the job. The lesson is the relationship you have with the people you serve is the foundation everything else sits on. And once that foundation cracks, no budget, no resume, and no campaign can substitute for rebuilding it brick by brick. Trust isn't a problem you can outspend. Louisiana made that clear on live television in real time with receipts. Before I close out, drop a comment. Do you think voters are paying enough attention to primaries, or is that the missing piece? Subscribe if this breakdown gave you something to think about, and check out the next video. I'll see you in the next one, family. On that note, family, peace.